So this is going to be, I think it's the third episode of the Ronin podcast and little live Q&A. Today we have Pierre. Pierre, I'm just going to let you introduce yourself because your powerlifting background and everything you've achieved, like your experience in powerlifting is actually like it's really quite a lot. So can you explain just a bit about like how you got into powerlifting and also what your like, I suppose, major achievements, like major meets you've been to have been?
Okay. I probably got into powerlifting 2010, so 2010. I started competing with the British Drug-Free Powerlifting Association. At that time, classic or raw powerlifting was with just a belt and wrist wraps. So my first competition was the English, and I actually got into it because I was considering bodybuilding. So I was a slender figure then, of probably about 80 kg. I obviously got in touch with Lawrence Farncombe, and then he said, actually, I think you're pretty strong, you should probably do the English. I did the English as a junior, and I actually came first place, and from there I was hooked. I think the next competitions after that was the British, which I won in the BDFPA. Then also went to Europeans. So the Europeans was in Ireland, also under the umbrella of World Drug-Free Powerlifting. So that was also the bigger umbrella of British Drug-Free Powerlifting. So from there, I did the Worlds also, and also won that. And then the Classic, so what is known as the IPF Classic, was then created. And for me, that was the target, and that was where I wanted to be. And that's when I started to compete under British Powerlifting, or Great Britain Powerlifting Federation, as it was known.
Okay, cool. So and then you've done like quite a few different meets in between there, like Commonwealth? Was the Commonwealth champs you've done? Like Commonwealth champs, like have you ever been to, what other competitions have you done? Because obviously you've done the British pretty much every year. That's kind of like, that was kind of like, I'm guessing, a given pretty much as soon as you started because of like how kind of high up you kind of inserted yourself into it. And then how was it all changed? I know British Drug-Free Powerlifting is still going, but GBP, is it GBPF now, or is it something else? Because I know that they've changed their name a few times.
It used to be the GBPF, and now it's under the name of British Powerlifting. They changed it a couple of years back. In terms of competitions in British Powerlifting, I have won the British twice. So that's Classic, which is just knee sleeves, belt, and wrist wraps. And also I've won the English 3 times. So I think I've competed in the English 3 times across maybe 5 years, and I've won that 3 times. I've also been to the Europeans twice and the Worlds once, I believe. The Arnold's twice. The Commonwealth was the last international I did, which I got silver.
Yes, I remember you were umming and ahhing about doing the Commonwealth. I remember like when you got invited, because was it quite a short notice thing? Because I know that some meets with powerlifting are very similar to weightlifting. It's kind of like you get an invite when you get an invite, and then it's kind of up to you to find your way there.
So the difficulty in doing the Commonwealths was, it was, I think, maybe a matter of 4 weeks after the British. And okay. So, you know, it's like a quick turnaround, and trying to double peak for any competition, one has to give. Excuse me. One has to give. The British didn't go too well, actually, this year because of some things, I guess, non-lifting related. But the Commonwealths turned out a lot better 4 weeks later.
Okay, cool. Decent. And then as far as all these comps have gone, because I think it's been, say, 10 years, what were you doing before that in terms of sports? So you got into powerlifting because you were starting to bodybuild. Were you in the gym alongside another sport before that? Like, where did you actually start, not powerlifting, but training? So when did you start your like training life?
Okay, well, actually, I think this is something which I haven't really talked about, to be honest. And I started training when I was incarcerated, to be honest. I had done some things in the previous life which wasn't too good, and once I was in there, the only outlet was to train. So I started to train every day, and I just got really, really interested in training. And also people started to ask me, once I was free, once I came back into the community and I was free, people started to ask me, oh, how did you get this? And how did you do that? And I started to realize that actually this could be a potential career. And that's how I started to get into lifting. I was playing football previously. So football was my main sport. I've only ever played football probably until the age of like 18, and maybe played a little bit in my 20s when I started powerlifting. And then I decided actually powerlifting, I'm okay. I guess I'm pretty good at this. And I decided to knock football on the head and pursue powerlifting a little bit more.
Well, yeah, no, I've heard that from like, obviously I won't name them because I don't want to like put anyone's sort of like dirty laundry out without like saying anything. But I've heard that from a few guys who've had like run-ins or sort of like been into prison or incarcerated where they started training when they've come out. One of the kind of like the best career choices for them because of the circumstance they found themselves in was to start coaching. Because I suppose if training is one of the only things you can do when you're in that situation, then it's obviously going to start meaning a lot to you. And I suppose that that will transfer over quite well to someone else as well. Like if you've had that like hard time and you're training and then you're having to train a client who's going through a hard time as well, you can, it's pretty likely that whatever they're going through, you've been through something that's just as difficult, and it'll be easy enough to kind of relate to them and get them through it, I guess.
I think, to be honest, for me, training was a great outlet. It was a great way for me to blow off some steam. And then I started to realize actually how positive it can make you feel. And from there, that's when I decided actually this is probably the career path that I've never known that I wanted to pursue. And once I did get into the fitness industry, whether that be just starting out as a personal trainer and then now moving into coaching with powerlifters and athletes, etc., this really had me hooked. And whether it was gaining muscle mass or gaining strength, it just kept me coming back and kept me feeling good. And that's what's really kept me drawn to lifting or powerlifting, etc.
Yeah. And then as far as like coaching went, did you start when did you start coaching as well?
I think I've been coaching for 6 years, 6 or 5 years. It actually started out with a younger lifter coming to me and asking if I could help them with lifting. And to be honest, I wasn't sure at the time because obviously when you're starting out something, you're nervous and it's new and you're not sure. But I had been powerlifting for a reasonable amount of time, and I thought definitely I would be able to steer them in the direction of some of the mistakes that I may have made and some of the things which my coach had passed down to me.
Okay, cool. And then I think is Lawrence the one and only coach you've had? Because have you been with him pretty much since the beginning?
Yeah, I'll just talk about actually how I met Lawrence, to be honest. I was a personal trainer in a chain of gyms. It was a chain and it is no longer exists. That was Soho Gyms. He was also a strength coach and also a personal trainer, so he was doing a bit of both. He had some lifters already. And a colleague of mine, when I said to him about competing in bodybuilding, he said, listen, I think you're too shy to perform. Like you couldn't really wear the smalls and I don't think you'd be able to pose to the music, but you're strong. Like I think you've got some potential, so maybe speak to him. I spoke to him on the phone. He said, tell me your lifts. And he said, come down and I'll have a look. Once I came down to his branch of Soho Gyms, within a few weeks, he said, actually, there's a competition, which was the English as a junior. And he said, we're going to put you in. And literally from that day right up until now, he's been my own and solely coach.
And would you say that's been one of the reasons why because I know there's like, I think we've talked about this a few times where you get people who kind of within powerlifting for whatever reason, because it's not necessarily their focus for both like a passion and a living like it would be for like a lot of us in here, but they kind of like dip in and out. And then you get some guys like I can't remember who we were talking about, like I can't even remember their name, but it was someone who was massive probably about 3 or 4 years ago before we knew each other, that we both knew. And then I remember we went, I wonder what happened to them. We look on Instagram, their page is gone, not lifting anymore, and they kind of drop out. Do you think sticking with Lawrence for that amount of time, having the same coach and being able to consistently build has been one of the things that's been a part of your consistency to be able to keep on progressing for this long?
Absolutely. And I think the word consistencies is something which I try to strive for day in, day out, week in, week out. It's just adding that little bit more, doing just enough, trying to get a little bit more. And with him knowing me over years, it was easier for him to coach me because he would know most of these things. He would know my traits. He would know my personality. And you're forming that bond. And I mean, now we don't have as much communication, and also I'm coaching. So you know, I've developed my own skills and I've took some from him, and I've been around other lifters and I've developed those skills as well. So just having him there as the point of reference, someone who's been there and done it, lifted as well, and had lifters lift at that level, it just kept me excelling, and it kept me coming back year after year after year.
Yeah. Well, I think the first time I remember meeting Lawrence was when he did a seminar like where I used to work. I think I know with squatting, he used to use it as an example of like basically how he had this. He's so particular about his whole technical model of like how you brace, how close your hands are, where you put the bar on your back for squats, where your weight is, how you breathe. And then I think he went over like a whole thing after he went over this, how he was like, oh yeah, this is the way I believe to do it. But there are certain things you're just not going to be able to get to carry over some people, so you have to work around it. I remember he used to use an example for quite a lot of stuff because he said, oh, I know Pierre really well. I've coached him for so long. There's some things we've tried where I shouldn't have made him try them, and we've stuck with this and this and this instead. So I know that Lawrence is like a good guy. He's also very particular about a lot of things, but he also seems to keep on wanting to learn. Like the amount of messages I'll get off of him sometimes, like I won't hear from him for months. Then it will be like a paragraph of questions being like, oh, just wondering about like these few things. Just trying to look at like this and this. Like he's like probably one of like the best coaches I know of through powerlifting. And I can see like I can also see why you've like stuck with him for so long.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he kind of nurtured me, and I think a lot of, I would say, you know, you always develop your own style of coaching because you start to branch out, you start to meet different coaches and different people doing slightly different things, and you read text and you watch videos, etc. There's a lot of information out there, but a lot of the basics stem from what he has taught me, which a lot of what was like technique and drilling in technique and making sure you get that right first, and having to take things back if you need to, and just really grinding in technique. So a lot of success, not just as a lifter, but as a coach, I think has come from him.
Yeah, I think what is his whole like tagline and everything is technique is king. Like if you can move more efficiently, then your strength's going to count for more, which I thought it was cool to see that in powerlifting as well as weightlifting. So obviously with weightlifting, you see it's always like everyone wants to bicker about technique. He was one of the first people I saw who said, yeah, your technique has to be bang on, and then went through all of his little slides where he goes through joint angles and positions and all that stuff. I really appreciated. But so with coaching, because I didn't realize obviously we met. I remember we kept on bumping into each other like at Lawrence's gym, like when it opened up in Cardiff, and then random places. And then I remember, I think when we first like actually started becoming friends and saw each other more was at BD. I didn't realize that you didn't just coach powerlifting; you actually coach like a wider range of people. So what is the range of people you coach? So I know you obviously coach people like Luca, like Paula, who are powerlifters. And then who else do you coach? Like what are the people?
So I mean, look, I am also obviously, first and foremost, I was a personal trainer, and as you know, as a personal trainer, you work with a variety of people. And actually, I have a lot of, let's say, elder clients, whether that's male or female, where actually we can really focus on, like, for example, the squat and variations of the squat and variations of the bench and the deadlift, very technically. So just think of the very technical aspects, and that transfers very well in terms of whether it's, I don't know, it might be losing weight, it might be gaining mass. These people also are some who I coach. So not just powerlifters only, like some general population are also some of the people who I coach as well.
I mean, do you say that like do you think, because I know obviously with a lot of some general population stuff, it's quite difficult to obviously get them to do sort of our sports as a whole, but is that something that you look to try and get people into? So once you've had them for a bit and they're getting fitter and strong enough and mobile enough to do the lifts, is that something you try to encourage them to do?
Well, absolutely. I think, especially of late, because there is now options of, let's say, for example, like novice comps and comps where you don't need to be a member of a federation. You don't have to sign up. You don't have to, everything's not so official. It's just, how would you like to try this? And a few people have tried it for, actually, I really enjoyed it. So I have taken some general population and pushed him towards, maybe, how about we work towards or build towards a 1RM test or build towards a competition, and they've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I've seen you've had quite a few people who, there was the when you had like your like intro class to a powerlifting at BD, you had quite a few people then carry on and then go into the comp and really enjoy it. I think a few of them have done like 2 or 3 comps of like novice comps after that as well, haven't they?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, so, I think that's brilliant, mate. So when it comes to let's say like programming or coaching your general population people who, how's the best way to split it? So when you have your general population clients who powerlift, how do you split them up, or what's different about the way you coach them to the people you have who powerlift as their main focus in sport?
I think with powerlifters, for example, it would be more specific, and we would use percentages, and we'd use RPE, so to gauge where they're at, and also building back from a competition, so periodizing the training back. We would periodize also with general population, but there wouldn't be so much emphasis on percentage or RPE, because we're not testing the 1 rep maxes as much as we would, as that's not the focus. It's like a secondary goal. We would generally focus a bit more on bodybuilding movements and isolation, because their goals also is to be fitter, maybe to look a little better. So it's not just about the numbers or the weight on the bar. So it wouldn't be, as I say, as specific. I wouldn't be so tied into RP, as I said, as variations of the squat. Like, there wouldn't be so many of those. It could branch out a little bit more.
Yeah. Okay, cool. And then, so when you have like the general population, and then your powerlifters, let's say, I can't remember what the lady's name is. I know she's competed at BD.
Nina?
Yeah, that's like, let's say like Nina
Nina
versus Luca. So Luca, obviously, if he comes in on a certain day, I know there's been days where obviously he has that weird shit going on with his adductors or his hips where he's in pain, but he'll train anyway. Then would you have that same sort of like style of training with like Nina versus Luca, or would you have more kind of like leeway for someone like Nina where she's powerlifting, but it is part of getting fitter, whereas like Luca, it's like, no, it's about competition and getting as strong as possible?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, strongest strength, like for Luca, like you would say, as the powerlifter, strength is paramount. That's the number one goal. With Nina, for example, it would be the secondary goal. We would be looking at, she has some sub goals as well. And introducing powerlifting is a focus, or let's say gearing towards a competition where it might take away from her having to think, oh, actually, that's only me focusing on, for example, weight loss, or it could be muscle building. It's just, we're training lifts, but also is towards her goal. So I think in terms of being different, as I said, it wouldn't be so geared to, we have to do this today. You need to hit these numbers today. We need to do this, because otherwise in the competition, we won't be competitive. There isn't so much pressure.
Yeah, it's that whole, I can't remember where I saw it, but there's a whole thing of I think we've talked about it once, where it's kind of like with, like, let's say me, like you, Luca, Dan, like Chris, we're focusing on competing. So it's like we're trying to get the biggest numbers as we can, and we're just trying to stay as healthy as we possibly can while we do that. Whereas for Nina, it would be a case of she's trying to be as healthy as possible and then do powerlifting as well. It's that kind of weird, it's that weird flip of the, it's that kind of weird turn of the phrase that makes like a massive difference. Because realistically, if you have like, well, like I'm pretty sure I've come in once and Luca was like sat on the adductor machine, literally just doing like no weight with no pin, just trying to get his hips to open up, like hobbling around, like kind of like shuffling around, being like, oh, I'm going to see if I can deadlift. Then deadlifted absolutely fine. I think that was one of the sessions where I think he got a PB. I can't remember what you were coaching him through. It's on the main platform. And then he hobbled off afterwards. He still couldn't walk. But he was like, he was so happy because he managed to get a PB, didn't care that his adductors was trash and he couldn't walk. But then I can imagine if you had someone like Nina came in like that and had their adductors trash, you'd be like, you're absolutely by no accounts doing sumo deadlifts today. We'll do something else.
Yeah, and there isn't the need for us to push for that. There isn't the need for us to be saying, okay, because that's the goal and that's what we need to do. We can always look for another option. We can always do something else, which again would still be working towards the goal, which might be, like we said, muscle building or losing body fat, etc.
Yeah. So started going through some like different little topics now. Some of the things that I was like mainly interested in, because I think as far as what do you call it? I think, what's it called? The subtotal. So like your subtotal versus your like whole total, like you're fairly balanced and like the way that like you compete. So which one of the lifts has given you like the most trouble out of all of them to develop?
The squat.
Yeah.
The squat has been the hardest lift, I think, and there's a few reasons for that. I think one of them is the way I'm built and the way I carry mass, and also the body weight that I started at. the body weight I started at was around 75 pre-powerlifting. And quite quickly I pushed to 90, and I'm probably like 100 or 95 now. And this is like, what, 10 years down the line? So
Yeah.
I never really developed mass on the quads. I had mass on the hamstrings, in the glutes, in the lower back, which was really good for deadlift. But being so tall and weighing what I did, let's say being around 6 foot and weighing around 90, I was never really a good squatter. There was a long way to go, and my legs didn't really have that much muscle mass.
Yeah, like I'm obviously kind of built slightly further across to the other side to you, but I know that when I went from being like very large, so like into the hundreds, even down to like the high 90s, so from 100 down to 97, I noticed squats got so much more difficult, like bench did as well. So that's something that you notice, that as your body weight increased, squats just got easier because of that. Because I know that
Yeah,
I felt it as soon as it's, I don't know if it's because there's less underneath the bar, but it felt like with deadlifts and pulls, you can kind of lever yourself against it either way. But with squats, it felt like as soon as like every kilo, it's almost like it's just one little bit less. It's almost like one little bit less of support underneath me. So then like I'd go from feeling really solid, being able to take the bar out, and then all of a sudden you can feel like the shaking happening, and you really have to pay attention to what you're doing.
yeah. I think also like it's kind of like, you know, filling out the limbs and your levers and making things to your advantage. And I think my legs, in terms of leverage at that weight, it wasn't good. And now that I've gained 5 or 6 kilograms, my squat has gone up. And even in my recent competition, my squat has gone up, and it hadn't gone up for a long time. And just
Yeah.
by gaining a couple kilos, it helped with the leverages.
Yeah, no, this makes sense. And so since like the squats are the most difficult thing, so what, apart from the weight gain,
Mhm.
what else? What other, like, let's say, like what are the key things you think made the difference to your squat to build it? Not just going into like this first plateau, but just overall, like across the 10 years you've been powerlifting for. What are the main things? It could be exercises, like programming tips, like technique tips. What made your squat get better?
I think is first and foremost, I think I used box squats quite a lot. Box squat was like one of the basics I used in the beginning, just to gauge depth and gauge sitting back and where I need to be at the bottom position of the squat. And also going back, so regressing, so taking things back. So after a competition of obviously pushing things to the higher lows, higher percentages, etc., pushing the 1RM, taking things back and stripping the lift back and looking at how we could move a bit more efficiently, as well as doing like isolation to build up muscle mass in the quads, for etc. Things like this really helped my squat to progress. I have also used many other things like bands to help push through sticking points, and chains also to help push through sticking points. I guess there is a particular point and time where you'd want to use those depending on what weakness that is. But I think these have been really helpful, like things like tempo squats, etc. Really helpful to find out where you need to be in every part of the squat.
Yeah, no, that's good. I like the because when you do a box squat, obviously there's different kinds of box squats. So when people usually think of box squat for powerlifting, they'll think about the West Side style one where you kind of rock back. I know
Yeah.
you're thinking of because I've seen you do both variations, which I like the almost like the pin touch, where you just touch the pins lightly instead of doing like a dead stop pin squat. Is that kind of how you treat a box squat? So you kind of perch on it, but you don't change your body position and shoot up.
Yeah, and just as you're talking about the two, I mean, like obviously when I was coming into powerlifting, West Side was popular, and I mean we did me and Lawrence, we did talk about it, and we did look at some of the movements there, but always from the beginning he said we wouldn't rock back because he felt like this was suited more towards equipped and trying to rock back and sit back into the suit to get something out of the suit.
Yeah, 100%. I agree with you.
That's where it was beneficial. But with a raw squat or classic lifter, you need to hold position, because when you're coming in and out of the hole, in and out of the bottom of the squat, you need to keep the torso angle the same. So you could come out in a good position, and we would also be looking at bar path also, the shortest distance possible to lift the weight so we can lift more kilos.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, I preferred you and Lawrence's kind of like way of teaching a box squat in terms of, I think I've even heard Matt Wenning said it. He was like, if you sit on a box and when you come off of it, your knees change position or they go forwards and backwards, it means your weight shifted, which to me obviously also didn't make sense. Like I've used box squats like on and off, and they feel obviously different to pause squats because it's obviously focusing on different ranges of motion. But when you do it the way that you're describing it, it does make a lot more sense for raw lifters. I imagine, like, let's say a rock back box squat might work if you're, let's say, like a sprinter and you're trying to learn to have that, how to like take advantage of that stretch shortening cycle a little bit more maybe, or how to like go from relaxed to contracted. But I did always wonder like how you would use box squats for raw powerlifting versus the West Side one, because the West Side one was the only one I'd ever seen. But the way that you describe it does make more sense, keeping that back angle and just using that box to determine what depth you're going to for the day.
Yeah, and a bit like what you touched upon with the pin squats, basically the light touch where you're basically putting the brakes on as you get closer towards the pins. That's also, again, obviously, to kill that stretch shortening. It's also to be in a good position right at the bottom. So then when you are able to use that stretch shortening, you should be fairly comfortable to bounce in and out the hole.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I've even seen it where even like I can't remember who you were coaching, but like they would do a double touch, they go like right left. And I think it's that whole thing where obviously they're leaning to one side, but I quite like like movement, like goal-based stuff. So where like you can tell someone to do something and they'll self-organize themselves to do it. So when I think you just said you need to stop fucking touching right and left, it needs to be both at once and you come up, and they stopped doing this weird squirmy thing with their hips, they just went down perfectly straight. Like that stuff where it's like you don't have to focus on all the little bits and bobs your body's doing. It's like just go down evenly, the pins will tell you whether you're doing it or not. Like it's a really like invaluable tool, because you don't have to say much. You can be like, I just need you to do this, go figure it out, and then you watch them, and then you can figure out like what's going on from there. It makes it a lot easier to train when you can do stuff like that, but also a lot easier to coach.
Yeah.
So when it came to, with the bands and chain stuff, did you use it? So obviously there's kind of like the two extremes. There's like Ash's way. If no one knows who Ash is, go on Instagram and type in never train legs and go look at some of the band stuff that he does. And then there's kind of like the way that I imagine that you and Lawrence might use it, where it's a bit more sparing. It could be for technique work, like the front banded stuff that you do, like stuff like that, where it's like it's more about not accommodating resistance but technique and putting you into a certain position. So how did you use bands and chains for your squat? Like give like an example of like, I don't know, like maybe 2 weeks out of something you would have done.
Oh, okay. So often we may look at using, for example, maybe red bands, mini bands, doubled over mini bands, and it wouldn't be a crazy amount of tension. It could be something like 5 times 3, for example, 5 triples. This will probably be the secondary squat day, and it could be anywhere from around 50 to probably maximum. It could be 65%. So we wasn't really pushing things super hard, but we were just looking at positioning, and also the bands were there to just decelerate the bar, just to slow the bar down. And also we were still looking at moving quickly, but we weren't having a crazy amount of band tension, for example, which was pulling you down. It was just enough just to slow the movement down at the top. And then the next week could potentially be, it could be slightly higher, it might be 55 to maybe 70%, for example. And it could be four triples, for example, but it wouldn't be anything too like crazy in terms of overload. And it was mainly a secondary squat day for technique.
Yeah, so it's kind of, it was a bit more similar to the West Side stuff, where it is for speed. Yeah, and I like the maybe going lighter but being able to accelerate through it, because the band kind of it's kind of like that gentle reminder, that cue. It's like, no, you have to accelerate through this, otherwise the weight's going to go all over the place. But I think that does make sense. Like, would you say, because I know the West Side stuff is very extreme, it's kind of like you max out this day, you do your volume this day, whereas I know that with Lawrence's style and your style, it kind of nothing is that absolute. So you'll have some days where the weight is higher and the volume's lower, but there's still sets and reps, and then you'll go to another day where the weight is lower and the volume is higher, but not necessarily, because like 4 to 5 triples at that kind of percentage, some people would say that's not that much, but I'm guessing on the heavier day, the primary squat day, you'd be doing more volume. That would kind of balance it out.
It probably would be more volume, and I guess it might be, for example, straight weight. It might just be straight weight. So then you have one day where you're, doing the movement, let's say complete, the actual movement specific, and then the other day is obviously just a technical day, because you're not doing the full movement. You're just trying to refine that technique. So when you come back around to the heavy day, you would be able to transfer over and use those things that you're doing with the bands, for example, to the heavier squat. So the squat was never ever being broken down too much, because you were just constantly chasing weight.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. That does make more sense in terms of how you use the bands and chains, in terms of it's that sort of continuum of, you're either going to use loads of that stuff and you're going to push the volume of the bands and chains, and then only go heavy on variations, or you kind of mix it between the two. Like if you're going to use it, then you use it staying quite close to your main variation to have a bit more carryover. So yeah, that does make a lot of sense. What were your favorite like accessory movements for building a squat? Because I remember you said like stuff about building mass like around your legs. What are your favorite movements for that?
I think we talking like squat variation or other, let's say it could be like
Absolutely everything. So like give me like your main squat variation that you would use that's obviously not the back squat, and then like your favorite, like I suppose you call them accessory or bodybuilding movements to build up your legs. Or what were the ones that worked best or do work best now, like whichever?
I think actually for me, for someone who's posterior dominant, so most of the mass on the hamstring, the glutes and the lower back, like things like high bar, things like front squats. Of recent, actually, been trying to get more into front squats because, of course, we know we're getting that excessive knee travel and it's trying to build up the quads more. So front squats and high bar is something which I've been using quite a lot in training to build up the mass and also just to try stress the quads a bit more rather than my posterior chain taking over like it would be in a low bar squat, because I'd be leaning forward more and actually using that posterior chain to do pretty much most of the movement a bit like a deadlift. So in terms of like say squat variation, these would be some of the movements which I would be using. Isolation wise, anything like for example split squats, anything that's going to be again excessive knee travel or deep knee bend, this is really going to has really helped me to build up the quads. So split squats, for example, it might be lunges, it could be leg press with the feet very low so that you get deep knee bend. Things like this were some of the movements that I've been using to build up the mass.
Yeah, that's good. No, it's kind of, so it's a mix of not just those specific movements, but also not being afraid to go over to the machine section or grab dumbbells or different stuff to try and get some extra work in.
Yeah, I think bodybuilding, there is definitely always time, I think, for a powerlifter, especially if there's time further away from competition or just after competition, or it might be in the general pet phase, or where you can focus on hypertrophy, where you can just build mass where you don't have it. And then also, obviously, more mass means more contractile power. So you should be able to transfer that over to the back squat, for example. So that's always what we would be doing. We would be looking to obviously hypertrophy straight after competition, and then things would be a little bit more specific in the next phase, and then we would probably start peaking and then tapering off.
Yeah, that makes sense. So the other lift that I would be actually keen to know on is obviously your bench. Because I think what's the most you've benched?
In competition, the most I've benched is 180, but I have in the gym, I mean, I've benched 190 before.
Yeah, so, and that's like, I found that surprising that you said the squat was the more difficult one to bring up, because usually when you see people who've got like a big deadlift, usually it will kind of go, the deadlift's big, the squat is kind of obviously a bit further behind, but it's still quite big, and then it's usually that's where you see people struggle when they've got the limbs for deadlifting but not for anything else. So why was your bench so good?
To be honest, when it comes to bench, I feel like I have quite a lot of mass on the chest and the triceps, for example. And even in my first competition, I think I benched like 150 or 140 or something like that. So for a first competition, it was pretty high. It was pretty high to bench. Maximum, I think, grip. So grip width is really what's helped my bench, obviously reducing ROM. Other than that, I'm not too sure, to be honest, because as you said, having long levers, having long arms, usually the bench really suffers. But having strong, big chest and a strong back, like it would be for the deadlift, and also generally quite a lot of mass on the triceps has helped my bench press tremendously.
And what helped you to sort of build that? Was it just doing a lot of benching and just trying to get better at that technically, or was it, like you were saying with the squat, like other variations and accessory movements to build that particular amount of mass?
With the bench press, because when I started benching, I wasn't, for example, I didn't really have a huge arch. I wasn't reducing the ROM as much as I could. I just tend to use more like a bodybuilder, using so much chest, the grip was slightly narrower and triceps. When I started to look at building your arch, so using some of the legs to build one part of the bridge and also getting high up on the traps to build the other part of the bridge, we started to reduce the ROM. And also when I started to take my grip out, that's when I put myself in a very strong position as holding the arch, and then was able to bench like considerable amounts of weights, and the bench started to come up. There was definitely some bodybuilding in there too. Again, never too far away from that. But mainly, I think building the arch, so building that sturdy base, is what really started to push that bench press up.
Okay, cool. Well, I've heard that from, obviously from Lawrence, but then from a few other people, that when they started to arch and work on that, like the craft of like making your technique better, that's when their bench went up. I know that obviously with you, was it a gradual process? Like you started to get your technique better, and then over time you just saw the kilos start to creep on.
Yeah, I mean, because if you think about it, it's over the span of the time that I've been lifting, it's a steady progress. But when you're staying at the same body weight, so when you're staying at the same body weight, that is going to be a steady process. If you were to maybe jump up body weight, then your bench press might excel a bit more because mass moves mass, etc.
Yeah.
So if you was doing that, then it might excel. But for me, I had to kind of rely on the technical side of making sure that the bench press position, my arch position, was sound. And once I did do that, the weights, the kilos, like every competition was 2.5 here, 2.5 there, 2.5 here, and then it started to add up. And that got that bench press closer to where the deadlift really was, because I'm built for deadlifting, I feel like.
Yeah, because I think the person I noticed most from like kind of when people argue about how much an arch added, the person I noticed who got the most out of it, and it seemed like really quickly, but I don't know if that's because he doesn't post that often about it. Owen Hubbard, where like it seemed like he was around like the 150 or 160 mark kind of consistently, and then all of a sudden there's like I remember seeing one video where it's like him benching fairly normally. Then there's one where you see him do the kind of the exorcist head on the bench, and then he's benching like close to, I think it was, I don't know if I'm imagining this, was it 202?
His current best bench press is 218, I think.
Yeah, so like, I remember seeing like a 170 or 180 bench, being like, oh fuck, like for a guy who's like not that close to 100, like weighing in like one of the 80 kilo classes, that's good. And then the next thing I realized, he's benching 202, and I was just sort of like looking around, like this can't be the same person. And I remember seeing that comp going on Instagram, looking back and being like, no, this is the same guy.
Yeah, and actually, he actually called it like raiding the arch. He said about raiding the arch. He focused on building the arch, and once he had built the arch, it put his shoulders in a very strong position where he could shift a considerable amount of weight, and also reducing the ROM. So reducing the ROM within the rules of obviously powerlifting, keeping your head down, your shoulders down, your bum down, your heels down.
And do you think, so obviously I know they tried to, the IPF like and the IWF, I don't know why they always seem to at the same time, but they made rule changes, and one of the IPF's like proposed ones was to make the arch within reason, but obviously you can't really make the arch within reason unless it's like you're going to get like some kind of tape measure or something out. Like what do you think will happen with the arch? Because obviously there's a lot of people who don't want it in anymore because it reduces ROM so much, but usually amongst girls more, like where you get people where they can literally almost breathe and touch the bar and then press it. So what do you think will happen with it, and do you think anything should change with it?
So there was some rule changes proposed in the IPF, which filtered down to British powerlifting. There were some rule changes which were proposed that there should be a statutory amount of range of motion that should be introduced. And for me personally, this motion was never passed. It was never passed because you have to understand that everybody is built different. Everyone is built differently. I might be built for deadlifting, which means I'm not good at squat. Someone might be built for bench press, which means they're not good at deadlift. And for that's the whole beauty of everybody being different. That's what makes it a strength sport. When you put these three lifts together, it's who has the biggest total of the three. So, and if it's an individual lift, the only individual lift they have is the bench press. And people would say that watching the sport where someone isn't really moving the bench press that much isn't impressive. Me, I would beg to differ, because in some ways it takes some sort of flexibility, some sort of skill to be able to move that weight regardless. And All they've done is abided by the rules, what the federation has set up. They haven't said that you cannot excessively arch. They said, make sure you keep your head down, your shoulders down, your bum down, your heels down, and which they have. And they said there's a maximum grip restriction, and which they've abided to. So for me, I don't feel like that's something I am opposed to. I don't have any problem with anybody arching. If you can do that, fair play to you. And I'm sure for that plus of being able to arch, there will be some negative, for example, like on the deadlift, is what you tend to see is it's difficult for a very big bencher to deadlift very well.
Yeah, that's a good point. I have noticed that, but I suppose it's a case of, I think a lot of people don't realize as well, like arching that much, like when you see this much, it's fucking hard. Like it's difficult. Like it takes a lot of energy to be able to hold that tension and hold that position and building up that skill level as well. Like when you've got like kind of when you just make yourself barrel chested, you drive your feet into and lie down. Like there's not as much to do. Whereas when you're setting up that arch, like it's a lot to be able to get into that position, to be able to set it up, and to kind of deliver to kind of be able to deliver that same high arch position every single time.
It's still a skill. It's still a skill for me. I still feel like it is a skill and it should be respected. And I don't think we should discredit these people because they have a shorter ROM than someone else. For example, someone would pull sumo and someone may pull conventional. We don't talk about how much difference there is in ROM there.
Yeah, definitely not. So with some of the questions that we've had, like some of the general ones, like they always like kind of have been stemming around lockdown at the moment. The main one that I think stood out in my mind when I looked at some of them was some people asked like what should you focus on powerlifting wise during lockdown? Like what considerations should you make if you've got kind of like the setup that like you or Paula or some other people have where you can still train but SBD as you would, but what considerations would you have given the circumstances of lockdown?
So for me, I think I would use it as a period of time to maybe focus on general preparation, or let's say hypertrophy training geared towards that. It might be time under tension, for example, it might be more reps. I just think not having something on the horizon, so not having a competition to periodize back or to peak towards, you should use this opportunity to give your body a break. You should use this opportunity to refine those small things that you may be lacking. And also for someone who's very competitive in powerlifting, use this opportunity maybe to let your body heal, your joints, etc., your tendons, etc. I have a few niggles myself in the shoulder, and I think this is a perfect opportunity for me to take a step back and really focus on the movement pattern. And I mean, if you're lucky enough to have an X amount of kilos, like unlimited amount of kilos, then you may be able to continue training as you were. But if there isn't a date or a competition that you're gearing towards, then what's the point? You're pushing hard without something at an end sight. So I think the best thing I would say to do is just treat it like a period of general preparation. Make sure your movements, like they're moving as well as they can move. You're looking at your movements and saying, actually, yeah, that bar off is looking pretty good, like 9 times out of 10. When I look at most of these reps, they look pretty consistent. Things like this, I wouldn't focus on the load being super high, the RPEs being super high. It would be a lower RPE, lower percentages of much more variation, because further away from competition, you do more variation. You may do a little bit more bodybuilding because we may not have access to copious amounts of, let's say, machines that I was using. So you may need to do like slow lunges, for example. You may need to do eccentric lunges. You may be able to do iso holds. You may have to do a lot of these things which will help keep mass and keep the body functioning well. For when we come back to the point where there may be a competition, we may be able to go back in gyms, then we can start to tailor things towards competing or testing 1 rep maxes, etc.
Yeah, so you want that kind of an enforced off season. Like I
Yeah,
know that we don't know the length of it, but taking an off season just to kind of let things heal up and work on things that don't require shit tons of weight.
Yeah, and I think in terms of when you say things like that, I'm pretty guilty of not taking these times. So this time has come as a blessing. This is a blessing for me because it's forced me. I don't have the amount of kilos that I need, as in the top end weights that I may use, but I have enough for me to do, let's say, reps or variations of the squat or variations of the bench. And this is what I've been spending my time doing.
Do you feel like that's gonna, like, even like I know obviously you had that problem with your shoulder where like heavy benching would like take its toll on it? I'm guessing maybe it's a combination of being more recovered, being less stressed because there's not as much going on. But has it started to kind of heal itself?
Absolutely, it has, and it's just because I'm not putting that pressure on myself where the numbers need to be somewhere. And
Yeah,
often when we're training, you're telling yourself the numbers need to be somewhere for me to hit X, X, X at this time. And without a date in mind, there's no pressure where the numbers need to be there. It just should feel good. The movement should feel good. If you are someone who films, you would look at the movement and say, actually, yeah, that looks pretty good. That bar path, that shape of that arch looks good. For example, my shoulder is pinned down. It's not rounding forward. It's not being impinged, etc. And that's really what I've been focusing on, not making the movement hurt.
yeah, no, that makes sense. And then, are there any changes you've had to make to your training when anyone else is where, like, they've got some kit, but obviously things like deadlifts. Like, I know that a lot of people can't deadlift because they're like, some people aren't on the ground floor or they can't afford to damage their floor. And what have you been doing? Like, I know you've been doing like glass floor stuff, like we posted about it like a week ago. But what would you do to still try and train your deadlift or your back on your posterior chain when deadlifts aren't an option directly?
Well, I mean, I guess if you have a barbell, then there's obviously other options like a Romanian deadlift. There's other options like good mornings. Anything that isn't going to require contact on the floor and also is going to work the posterior chain. So, like I said, good mornings. Even the movement, like you talk about, the seated basset opens. Those
Yeah,
are really, really good movements, which will really work the posterior chain. And these are things that will transfer very well to the deadlift. So some of those movements have been what we've done, single leg RDLs, those kind of things to work on stability. It could be like single leg group bridge. I don't know, it could be any of those movements, hip thrust potentially. These movements have been what we've programmed and looked at doing for anyone who can't put the barbell on the floor or can't put it on the floor without control.
yeah. No, that makes sense. Would you say it's kind of like, because I know like some people will obviously train the deadlift differently than let's say squats or bench, for example, because it is so heavy. But would you say because you're not going to have a competition coming anytime soon, like I know I'm not, that not putting the bar on the floor but still training your posterior chain in that bodybuilding fashion is going to have the same positive benefit eventually because you're kind of laying down some foundations now?
Yeah, and I think there certainly will. You're making the best of the situation, what we have. And often with programming in this time, in quarantine, we have to make the best of what we have. And some people would say, yes, I have a bar, yes, I have a rack, but my floor is not equipped for me to do that. And that's where we have to make those modifications. And I'm sure once they get back to deadlifting, within, let's say, a few sessions, everything should be firing back to normal.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of, it'll be more they're rusty or not lifting as heavy because they haven't practiced deadlifts, not because they're weaker.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then one more question, which is actually my question.
Yes.
What made you start doing these food polls on Instagram with like the sweets and the chocolates and shit?
To be honest, you know what? During this time, we're kind of peppered by news feeds, news flash, and there's always a story about the next thing about COVID. There's always a story about what's happening and what's happening in this country and what measures may be in place. And I think I wanted to do something that's lighthearted. I wanted to do something which I know most people, we all like some sort of food. And I don't know what it might be for someone, but someone likes some sort of food. So I just did something lighthearted and it got pretty good feedback. So I asked again if people wanted to do it and I just carried it on. So that, I don't know where I got the idea, but I just thought it would be an interesting thing to do.
Yeah, no, it's just like is it the jelly babies argument from like the little
Yeah,
Haribo packets? Like that one, that's an
yeah,
argument I've not seen happen since like you're in school or uni
yeah.
and people start fighting over which ones are left. Because
Yeah,
no one, I
exactly.
think
And
which ones are in the jelly babies, what one's the shit one that no one wants?
yeah, I think,
Yeah.
like the orange and yellow for me personally, they're the crappiest, but those are the worst
It's the
colors.
orange, the jelly babies, like the powdery ones. It's the orange one that's crap. And like, if you
Yeah,
look in the packet and someone's left you an orange one, that's like the start of arguments in a house.
yeah, it's a disrespect, isn't it? And I even asked also after is if you are with someone, a partner or friend, would you be fighting for the same sweets or they got bad taste? Have they got bad taste where they're taking the ones that you don't want?
Yeah, but if they take the ones that you don't want, is it bad taste or is it helping you out? That's the question.
It's perfect. It's perfect for you. They've got bad taste because they don't like the ones that you like.
That's exactly it.